When I was very active as a student in a later period, in the early 1980s, we very much emulated the generations before, of course. We fought a lot because I worked with two distinct communities. One organized around racial and third world struggles, and the other organized around gender struggles. In both of those situations, which were difficult for me, because in one, I would be the only black person, and in the other, I was one of very few women, and one of very few women leaders. Not few women, but few women leaders. So, but the idea of colonialism was often talked about in both groups as a metaphor, often, for something else. And even though today I used the term colonial in that sense, when I talked about colonizing other struggles, I learned in later years to be more careful, especially after working in solidarity with people from communities in the Global South, and especially after studying colonialism and post-colonialism in the university. And so what I really intended by ending today with such a difficult article was to introduce the problem of thinking about structure, but not only in terms of the familiar structural racism, but in terms of a lesser known way of thinking about structural racism, and that is in terms of property. And by this, I don't mean it metaphorically at all. When Harris is writing about a loss of property, she means it literally, in a legal sense. ¿Más despacio? No? In a legal sense, in the sense that slaves and indigenous people in the Americas were deprived of multiple forms of property in their persons and in land, and in many other ways, spiritually and in many other ways. And so this has a legacy in the legal apparatus, simply because we now have in the United States laws which guarantee equality doesn't mean that we have undone the legal system which defined property only by acknowledging certain people's titles. So I very hastily, at the end of my remarks in the beginning, refer to some of the knowledge I have about Colombia today. So my gesture was not a metaphor, but to suggest a connection between a more critical attention to a history of race in the United States, which involves substantial property, and to connect that to the racism that has been described to me in Colombia, which I think, as I've been hearing, is not only about whether someone is nice to someone else, but about whether whole groups of people will be able to retain their land. And so, in order to introduce the form of Black feminism that is most relevant to me, I wanted to gesture both to the socialist feminism that I learned as well, to the Marxist feminism that I learned, as well as the post-colonial feminism that I learned, which forms a part of the Black feminism that is the particular version that I feel represents me best, or my thinking. So, this is not to make all of our struggles